Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Rob Schroeder, and I'm the Fire and Safety Coordinator for the Sleepy Hollow Neighborhood Association. I'd like to thank everybody for attending tonight's meeting entitled How to Prepare Your Home for Wildfire, featuring MOFD Fire Chief David Winokur. Hopefully the things we learned tonight will give us a better understanding of the dangers of wildfire in our area and give us some insight into what we can do to make our community safer. I've heard this lecture several times in the past, and each time I learn something new and become more motivated to make sure my home is safe from wildfire. I would also like to thank Carol Bravelli, the Sleepy Hollow Neighborhood Association co-president, for her support, not only for helping to organize tonight's meeting, but for all of the other fire safe initiatives being implemented in Sleepy Hollow. Carol has been instrumental in reviving and expanding the FireWise certification in our neighborhood, as well as organizing neighbors to participate in the MOFD Chipper program. As there's a good deal of information to discuss, I will turn the meeting over to the Chief. I hope this meeting is a valuable resource for you, and thank you again for attending. Chief Winokur.
All right, well, thank you very much for having me tonight and for organizing. One of our real challenges as we work on fire safety is how we get the word out. The fire science and the work required is pretty simple. The act of organizing a community of 38,000 is anything but simple. And we certainly cannot do it without the help of engaged residents on the ground who not only spread the word, but also help educate and really enhance and enable our outreach efforts. So without any further ado, I'm going to attempt again to share my screen. We're going to walk through some slides. I've received a number of questions in advance that I'll attempt to answer as we go in stride with the presentation. And at the end, if I haven't, I'll rely on Carol and Rob to help keep me honest with posing any questions. For the rest of you, if you have questions that were not answered during this presentation, we'd encourage you to reach out to us at info@mofd.org. And our fire marshal, our fuels mitigation manager, myself, or any of our fuels mitigation specialists will get back to you as quickly as we can. So with that, let's see if it will work one more time. Okay, so good evening. Tonight we're going to talk about how we prevent fire and how we reduce the risk through mitigation efforts in your community. For those of you who've seen this before, it's very similar to what we've talked about in the past. There are a few additions based on things we have done in the last 6 to 12 months as we continue to iterate and evolve and to try to make ourselves better at this as we learn more as a district, a fire district, about how to most effectively communicate and outreach, and as the community's understanding of fire risk and as the community's level of organization evolves. We see here, just to orient you to the regional threat, this is the maps put together by CAL FIRE that show the areas that are considered very high and high fire hazard severity zones. And if you look at the right where we've blown out that portion, you'll note that all of El Toinal, large sections of North Orinda are categorized as very high fire hazard severity zones. And the vast majority of the remaining areas of Orinda, less the downtown, the village, if you will, are categorized as high fire hazard severity zones. As you look at this map, I'd ask you to remember that this map is dated 2009, and updated maps should be produced by the CAL FIRE FRAP division in either this year or early next year. And we believe, based on the unprecedented fire spread of the last several years, that the new maps will reflect a new reality, if you will, of catastrophic wildfire. And what we have seen, particularly in 2017 and 2018, we've seen year-over-year increases where every year is setting new records. And in the old days, some of the records lasted for 70, 80 years at a time between fire events. And now records are falling on an annual basis. So we expect the new maps, when they're released, will show that the models have significantly increased the modeled fire threat to this area. And this is a very good chance for us to get ahead of the fire risk, and to do so quickly with actions that can be taken at the individual level. If you look at the next slide, this is fire history in the East Bay. And so on the right, you see a macro shot of the entire East Bay area. And then on the left, you see a blow up of just our specific local area. And the fires I'd like to point out are the 1923 Berkeley Hills fire that started in portions of the fire district in Wildcat Canyon, burned up and over the Berkeley Hills, and stopped down near the intersection of University and Shattuck. And it only stopped when the wind died. The 1970 Fish Fire that started inside the MOFD's jurisdiction near the intersection of Fish Ranch Road and Grizzly Peak, and rapidly burned up into the Oakland Hill neighborhoods above there and burned 400 acres and 38 homes. And then, of course, the 1991 tunnel fire that many of the participants may have lived here during. All of those fires occurred in September, September and October specifically. And those fires were categorized by very dry, high intensity winds coming out of the north and northeast, the winds we refer to in this area as Diablo wind events. And so I offer that up just to say that the fires we are worried about from a catastrophic fire spread perspective are going to be wind-driven fires. They're going to occur in the fall, and they're going to come out of the north and northeast, which means in North Orinda, in Sleepy Hollow, and in the Downs, the exposure to those fires is significant due to the proximity to the wilderness areas of the Briones watershed, and then amplified by the fact that there is a single way to access and to egress those neighborhoods out Minor Road. And that very limited road is going to be required to both handle the evacuation traffic of almost 1,500 homes that use it as their primary egress, as well as large numbers of firefighting apparatus that we're going to be rapidly attempting to move up that road in order to fight the fire. So it's just something to think about as we talk about some of the measures that are available and some of the things you can do as a community to reduce the fire risk. Because as we do fuel mitigation work around your homes and at the micro level on your individual parcel, what we're doing is we're reducing the prevalence of receptive fuel beds. And reducing the prevalence of receptive fuel beds not only reduces the risk to your individual parcel, it slows the rate at which a fire will spread. And slowing the rate of fire spread accomplishes two things. It buys time for an orderly and efficient evacuation of the community, and it gives us time to aggregate an effective firefighting force. On any given day in the Bay Area, there are ample resources to put out a fire. They're just spread throughout a 9-county region, and it's going to take time to bring them and to bring them all to this community in order to fight fire. The next slide here shows just an illustration of where the Diablo winds generally come from. For orientation there on the right, you see the Briones watershed, and on the left, you see the San Pablo Reservoir. And then you'll also note running on an east-west axis along the north end of the town, there's a number of different shaded polygons. And those are the areas where we carried out the work of the North Orinda Shaded Fuel Break last year. This was a $4.25 million state-funded project as one of Governor Newsom's priority projects. And in 89 days, we constructed 19.3 miles of fuel break. And we're very proud of that fuel break. And that was a tremendous effort, all hands on deck. It was a partnership between a number of agencies. But that fuel break only disrupts the continuity of the fuel bed, i.e. the thing that fire requires to move from item to item. It only does that along the northern perimeter of the fire district. And fire at the scale we're talking about will spread via two means. One is direct flame impingement, fire moving in a linear manner from item to item. The second, far more important way that fire spreads is through three-dimensional ember cast. And that's where flaming brands or embers are carried aloft by high winds and can travel, depending on the fuel bed, miles in advance of the main body of fire. And when those flaming brands or embers land on something that will burn, on a receptive fuel bed, if you will, on uncut cured grass, on dead dry leaves, on tree litter and duff that have accumulated in roof valleys and gutters, those brands or embers can start small fires in their own right. And those small fires, if they are in proximity to things like a house, or they find an uninterrupted fuel bed, or they find a ladder fuel that allows them to move into the tree canopy, those spot fires that break out in advance of the main body of fire can grow to be enormous fires in their own right. And if you look at the terrain and topography of North Orinda, I don't think it's hard to imagine any number of areas that if flaming brands or embers landed there, they could start significant fires. And those significant fires could spread to both threaten lives and structures and compromise evacuation routes. So it's critically important that while we believe we made a good step forward, a good investment, if you will, in fire safety through the completion of the North Orinda Shaded Fuel Break, I want to be very, very clear that this did not solve the problem, and there's more work to be done, and much of that work needs to be done at the individual parcel level. All right, looking at this next slide. So the next thing is, where do we do the work? So working with our friends up at UC Berkeley, where conveniently for us, a significant number of the faculty have chosen to live in the fire district and have helped us out quite a bit. We worked with them and they ran some models for us. So this is a modeled fire starting at just north of the intersection of Happy Valley and Bear Creek Road. The star indicates where the fire starts. And the little dashed outlines show fire spread by hour. So if you see the first hour spread shows the fire moving up into Bear Creek Road and crossing the road in a couple of locations. The next hour shows it rapidly moving up the hill, approaching Orinda View and starting to encroach on Upper Dalewood and moving into the Downs. And by the third and fourth hour, we start to see that the Bear Ridge neighborhood has become heavily involved. It's crossed St. James Court. It's bumping up against Van Ripper, and is starting to close off access for escape routes on Lombardy and Dalewood. And the fires moved very quickly through those receptive fuel beds and uninterrupted, highly cured, dead and decadent fuels that make up the north-facing slopes in this area. So next they came and they took a look at fuel mitigation work that can be done along Bear Creek Road. And for those of you who can see the image, you see there's on each side of the road, they categorized the vegetation and they made specific recommendations about what sort of mitigation should be done to make that road a point that would hold the fire to a certain degree. And the next slide, you see how that same fire, modeled with all other conditions being the same, except that you now model the modification of the fuel bed along either shoulder of Bear Creek Road. And in the new scenario, the fire never jumps the road. And while that's still a significant fire, and it's still going to be a very busy day for our firefighters, that's going to burn up a bunch of grassland and a couple signs at the parking lot for the Brioni staging area, and not going to cause any significant structure loss. The good news is we took the exact same information learned from that modeled way we could decrease the fire threat. And if you look at the areas between Bear Creek and Happy Valley over here and Bear Ridge over here, the areas where we did the fuel break work along the North Orinda Shaded Fuel Break, we did the work that was recommended in that fuel modeling. And so consequently, we believe we've achieved the benefits where science told us we would have the greatest impact with our limited fuel mitigation dollars. We've done that work. We've also then taken, if you look at here on the macro scale, we've dropped down a number of fire start points, working with our friends at Zonehaven, our technology partners in this, with some additional help from the folks at Splunk, some of whom are residents of Sleepy Hollow and have been very helpful. And we ran a whole bunch of other models about what the 1, 3, and 5 hour fire spread would be from a given point. And out of those models, we've come up with recommendations for more fuel mitigation work, and we've come up with some evacuation recommendations. And what you see here is what the modeled fire spread is with no fuel mitigation efforts for a fire that starts on the slopes just north of Orinda View. And as you can see, very, very rapidly, that fire spreads down Dalewood over Lombardy and starts to encroach into Sleepy Hollow proper. And you can see how quickly this happens. And then you can imagine what efforts it would take to move 1,500 homes worth of people out of the limited roadway as we tried to move firefighters up. And the key piece to this, if you look at the way that fire spreads, early on, there's a couple of big jumps where the fire moves far in advance of the triangle where it shows the fire start. And what that is, those are spot fires. Those flaming brands or embers that are traveling in advance of the main body of fire. And when they are firing unmitigated fuel beds and receptive fuels, they are starting spot fires that quickly grow to be as large, if not larger, than the original fire. And that's particularly problematic because of the speed at which a wind-borne ember can advance and the consequent increases in fire spread rates, some of which may outpace our ability to conduct an efficient and orderly evacuation. So having talked about what the threat looks like in this area, and the next thing we're going to talk about is how we can reduce the risk. And there's two parts to this. One is what the fire district has done to reduce risk at the macro level. Work we have been able to carry out on large open spaces, on publicly owned lands, working with a number of government and private partners to get this work done. And the second part we'll talk about is what we can do as a community at the private parcel level, at the individual homeowner, the small parcel less than an acre, your average resident, what they can do. Because it's really important that we recognize that there's a role to play both at the macro level and at the micro level. And while we're going to continue working with our government and private industry partners to carry out the large scale projects, we're going to continue to aggressively pursue grant funding. We're not ever going to be able to do that kind of work at that scale on private parcels. And there's two reasons for that. One is that, quite frankly, we don't have the funding for it. It's very problematic to go get grants at large scale to do work on small private parcels. We'll talk some more about some ways that can be done, but generally speaking, the expectation is that property owners maintain their own properties. That's just how it works. And then the second thing is that our experience on the North Orinda Shaded Fuel Break and a number of other projects has been that when we come in and recommend work that should be done on a private parcel, it's a very laborious and tedious process, time consuming, going door to door with each parcel owner to identify what work they'll allow us to do and under what conditions. And even after having done significant outreach and having worked with the parcel owners, on several occasions on the North Orinda Shaded Fuel Break, a parcel owner essentially revoked the permission to do the work mid-stride. And so then all of the planning, all of the resources, all of the efforts that had gone into delivering a fuels mitigation crew to that location on that day were squandered because they said, and in one of the cases I quote, "You've done enough." At which point a hand crew and associated machinery that bill out at $22,000 a day, that work for that day was wasted because it takes time to align the biologists and all the other moving parts to shift them to a different part of the project. So our experience has been is that doing work on private parcels is best done by the private parcel owner, particularly when you're talking about work that's in close proximity to somebody's home. So the way we've been doing this, as I talked before about the ongoing coordination and mitigation measures. So the first thing was the North Orinda Shaded Fuel Break. That was a major effort, but I also, just for expectation management, I want to be very clear with everyone that the expectation that this community is regularly going to receive multi-million-dollar grants from the state for fuel mitigation is just not realistic. And that may have been one-time money. The project, not only our proposal for this year, but the program itself was not funded this year. And with the amount of resources that the COVID-19 response is requiring and the pending impacts to the state budget from the shutdown of the economy, I think it's very unlikely that we'll see grant funding at that scale anytime in the near future. The next thing we've been working on is there's a whole lot of people both in the district and in immediate proximity to the district who own land and have an interest in maintaining that land. And some of those people are organized and are great partners. So what we found, though, when we talked to them was that the work wasn't being coordinated, that everyone had their plan and their projects and what they do just because they'd always done things a certain way, but it wasn't being coordinated. And as a result of that, they're ending up with, say, PG&E was doing work in one area, East Bay Mud was doing work in close proximity to them, but because it wasn't coordinated, the edges weren't overlapping, and we were ending up with gaps in the line. And fire at the scale we're talking about is going to behave like water, and water finds a gap. And as anyone who has ever had an old roof during a rainstorm, if your roof is 99% intact, you still have a leak. And fire at the scale we're talking about will find those holes, and we will have a leak of fire leaking into the community. And so we've been working with UC Berkeley to do the modeling, with PG&E, who does significant amount of CPUC directed line clearance, as well as maintenance around their substations. East Bay Mud, who owns the vast majority of the watershed lands to the north, south, and somewhat to the west of the district, as well as County Roads, who has an obligation to maintain the roadside and meet their vegetation management. To a lesser degree, Caltrans, who has their own standards they follow and is very clear that they're not subject to local oversight. However, when we're informed about what work they're doing, it makes it easier for us to plan our work in a coordinated and manner that presents a systematic approach to the reduction. We're also working with homeowners associations. As many of you may know, there are some homeowners associations that have significant holdings of undeveloped land. And so working with them, because they're organized, they have a budget, they have an obligation to maintain their project, and they've been great partners. So working in a manner that we are aware of their work, we're able to consult and advise on what work they should do, and helping them seek out grant-funded opportunities to amplify their ongoing efforts. And then working with neighborhood groups. So less organized than an HOA, typically don't come with a budget, but come with a lot of organizational heft and an understanding of both their needs in the neighborhood and who the players are, if you will, in the neighborhood to help them get organized into Firewise. And then working with some of the large private landowners, there are significant sections of the fire district that cannot be developed for a number of reasons, and usually owned by a single landowner, and in most cases have been neglected for years. And so working with them to identify opportunities to mitigate the fuels there, and then grazing, among other things, looking at ways that we can restore ongoing fuel mitigation measures that won't require a whole lot of input in out years. Those are the big things we're doing on the large open spaces and in the areas where there isn't single homeowner with a set of shears or a gardener who can get to work on it. The next piece is what we're working on with defensible space. And this is really the part that's relevant to your group and to the Sleepy Hollow FireWise community and all the other FireWise communities. So the first step is education and outreach and making sure, one, that people understand what the need for the work is, two, that they understand what the requirements are. Because a lot of the things we're going to talk about in the upcoming slides, they're not only a good idea, but they're a requirement. They're by virtue of the fire code, in this case, MOFD Ordinance 16-02. These are legal requirements to maintain your property in a manner that's consistent with fire safety as identified in the fire code. We also offer a chipping program. So once people understand what needs to be done, the MOFD chipping program that the MOFD board has authorized and funded over the last several years gives us the ability to go out and partner. So hey, you're a homeowner, you have the intent to do the work, you have the desire to do the work, you're out actually doing the work. And the limiting factor is that your green cans aren't big enough to handle all of the organic material you're cutting, and your project is too small for a commercial chipping provider for it to be worth their time. So the MOFD chipping program has been offered where get 5 neighbors organized, come up with a date that you're going to be able to do the work, reach out to the fire district. We'll send out some cheerful aides with a chipper and a polo shirt and a big smile, and we will happily chip that stuff up as a partnership where we see it. You put in the effort of cutting it, we'll happily chip it if that unlocks the homeowner's ability to go out and really clear out some of that decant material. And then last is the Diablo Fire Safe Council. Cheryl Miller is the head of it. Our Fire Marshal Jeff Isaacs is a member of the board. And as the community has a project that benefits multiple homes to do some mitigation work on open space, so they're bringing in goats to graze a hillside or projects of that nature, the Diablo Fire Safe Council is able to provide grants of up to $5,000 to match a contribution made by the residents. And we've had a lot of luck with some of the large parcels unlocking some federal money via the Diablo Fire Safe Council in order to enhance the work that needs to be done in these areas. And then the last step we're doing, which is related to mitigation, is early warning. So that if there's a fire and we know a fire is going to spread rapidly, the sooner we learn of the fire, the more time we have to execute an orderly and efficient evacuation and to aggregate an effective firefighting force. So we've been very active working with primarily district residents who happen to be experts in these various fields, bringing them all together on a number of projects. The first one is a great example here of kind of what's old is new. Those of you who have the screenshot, there is a picture there. I took this afternoon. This is from a series of cameras installed by or managed by Alert Wildfire out of the University of Nevada, Reno, paid for by PG&E, but installed by Lafayette PD with our support. And these cameras, we have the ability to rotate them to look at a certain area if we're concerned about fire. And as you can see here, this camera is looking up the San Pablo Dam watershed drainage on the right and the Wildcat Canyon drainage on the left. This is the area where the 1923 fire started. And we're very confident that this network of cameras, as it continues to grow, will give us the ability to rapidly detect a fire coming out of one of the unpopulated areas of the watershed. This next slide is a little bit busy. If you go from left to right, this is just a way of saying we're trying everything under the sun. So we've hung LiDAR units, which is a laser sensing unit to give a 3-dimensional model of the fuel bed. We've hung them on drones. We've put them on electric bicycles and backpacks. We've put sensors out on the top right there around prescribed fire events we've conducted. On the bottom right, we've used ways to integrate our understanding of what the road closure might look like to communicate that to the community as part of evacuation exercises, both real and virtual. And then in the bottom center there, left side, working with our partners at Splunk, we've done a bunch of work to aggregate all of that into a dashboard. So all of these streams of data can be accessed. This slide is just a long way of saying we're trying everything we can think of, and we're going to continue to attempt to innovate. But there are some really basic things like fuels mitigation that can be done now that have real value in addition to these other sort of moonshot ideas. For whatever it's worth, our latest partnership working with the Moore Foundation and with Planet Labs is we're trying to use satellites for this. And maybe it's going to work, maybe it's not, I don't know, but it can't hurt to try. And we're committed to leaving no stone unturned as we figure out how best to crack the problem of not only preventing a fire, but getting people out of the way of a fire when it occurs. So now we get down to brass tacks of what your community can do. So really there's three things here as far as from top to bottom. One is to become a FireWise community. And we really appreciate the work that has been done by members of this group to organize. Sleepy Hollow was one of the first FireWise communities in the district and then fell off, lost their designation for a period of time and now is back. 2 years ago, we didn't have any FireWise communities in the district. And now we're pushing up around 18 with a couple more coming online. So we've seen a real interest, a resurgence in interest, both in fire safety, in fuels mitigation, and then organization into the FireWise community. One of the reasons FireWise is so helpful is that it is the program of record for how you organize and demonstrate your community's commitment to fire safety. And that's helpful for a number of reasons, but the one that's probably the most relevant as it comes to communicating to people outside your area what you're doing is it's a very useful tool you can use to communicate with your insurance company so that as they are running their models and as they are evaluating how much risk from fire loss they're going to accept in California, being a FireWise neighborhood, or we hope in time, being an entire FireWise community is a way that we can effectively communicate with the insurance industry to say, this community is different. Inside Moraga and Orinda and Canyon, we have accepted that fire is a very real threat to our community, and we have taken these concrete steps, both at the macro level with the external projects and at the micro level with the internal projects, as recognized by the FireWise program designation to reduce fire risk. And of the things we can do specific to insurance, this is one of the most effective because the FireWise program is understood, it is nationwide, and it is easy to explain to an insurance adjuster what it means. And it's a very, very effective tool to demonstrating our intent to become safer. The second bullet there is how we adopt best practice home ignition. There's some information from provided by CAL FIRE about how to reduce the prevalence of receptive fuel beds around your home. I would encourage people to look at it, like more information. I can summarize it as saying, if there are dead and dry things near your home, it is at risk. The degree to which those dead or dry things are removed and broken up so that there is not an unbroken fuel bed, i.e. a thing that fire can travel across without interruption as it approaches a home, your house will be safer. Fire spread is really caused by three things and three things alone. The first is weather, the second is topography, and the third is fuel. And of those three, fuel is the only one we can modify. So taking steps to break up the continuity of the fuel bed, because on a hot, dry day on a steep hill that's covered in gravel, fires don't burn. So obviously gravel is a little bit overkill and is probably more than we can achieve as a landscaping aesthetic. However, moving towards that, anything we do that reduces the prevalence of fuels, breaks them up, separates them so they are not continuous, and really focuses the effort on removing receptive fuel beds and dead, dry, combustible vegetation in proximity to a home is a benefit. And then the last item there is evacuation planning. That there are and will continue to be the potential for fires that regardless of how much fuel mitigation work we do, will still burn. And everything has an ignition point. And while more is always better when it comes to fuels mitigation, there comes a point that a fire may exceed all of our best efforts and may exceed our capacity to extinguish it during its early stages when we see catastrophic fire spread, fire line intensity, and fire weather all come in conjunction to create a fire that can't be stopped. And when that happens, it's important that we get people out of the way. We can rebuild homes, but we can't rebuild lives. And so we'll talk about evacuation planning, how some really simple steps you can take as a neighborhood to make sure you're prepared to evacuate in the event of a catastrophic fire. So the first thing is FireWise community designation. There's 6 steps. For those of you in Sleepy Hollow who have done it, we appreciate it. For those of you who are not in the area, we encourage you to go to the website and take a look. FireWise USA, there's 6 steps. MOFD is eager to partner with you on those steps. This next one is a graphic of where our FireWise communities are. As you can see here, We now have 16 recognized. There's 2 more coming online that are not in here, and I believe we have a couple more beyond that. But what's really exciting to me, as we see on this map, that the dots are starting to spread. And we started out with just 1 or 2 very small neighborhoods that with a couple of sort of visionary neighbors who took the initiative and were very clear they wanted to do this, organize their neighbors and became FireWise, and starting to spread. And some of these neighborhoods are now adjacent to other neighborhoods that are also FireWise. So we're very excited about the spread. And we think there's an opportunity as well as people who were not initially in a FireWise neighborhood say, hey, I want to be part of that, to add them on to the existing groups and to start to join some of these groups into larger blocks. And we're very excited about the progress that the community has made and the investment in organizing and going out and talking to your neighbors that it took to get us to this point. We really appreciate the engagement and the partnership from the members of the community who have largely driven this process. So now we get to what you can do. So this part is really straightforward. And like all things, it's simple to say and hard to do because we got to get everyone to do it. And if you do the work on your parcel, if you go out and you do all of these recommendations that we're about to cover, that will make your house safer. Absolutely. If your neighbors have not done the work, that will make you less safe. It will reduce the efficacy of your work. And so one of the things that we really like to see is, hey, do your work and then engage your neighbors in a talk about why it would be nice for them to do their work. And if they're unable or unwilling to do the work and you've done your best to talk them into it in a neighborly way, well, then at the bottom there's a way you can submit a complaint and we can come on out and issue a citation if we have to. Our goal is always voluntary compliance, and the power of a neighbor who is led by example cannot be overstated in bringing neighborhoods online. So to the specific examples. So annual grass and weeds, things that grow and die, they, are getting ready to cure right now, and within the next couple weeks to a month, will turn either brown or golden, depending on whether how you feel about the color of the state, and will be ready to burn. Those annual grass and weeds need to be cut to less than 3 inches by June 15th of every year. Really, the time to cut them is as soon as they've stopped growing and turned brown. That's a great time to cut them rather than waiting until the compliance deadline of 15 June. We've had 3 fires in the last 2 years that were caused by people in late June or early July doing fuels mitigation work. So we'd encourage people to do it early rather than wait till late in the year when we start to move into fire season. The next thing will be unirrigated brush, wild brush, coyote brush, baccharis, other things like that should be thin to remove. When you see large unbroken hillsides covered in coyote brush, that's fuel model 6 for the fire science folks among us. Fuel model 6 is scary and dangerous all at the same time. Those fuels have a high decadent component, meaning a lot of it is dead. They also have a high chemical component, meaning that brush under any circumstances is primed to burn and burn hot. Scotch broom or French broom, the similar type material, very, very dangerous and supports violent fire spread when it's thick. So that stuff should be either removed or thinned out so that it doesn't form an unbroken fuel bed. Trees that have a canopy that's low to the ground, they should be trimmed in limbs so the lowest portion of the canopy is 6 feet or more from the ground. So a normal sized person should be able to walk the drip line of the tree around the entire tree and not hit their head. And if you've met that standard, if it's trimmed up beyond that, then fantastic. Because what we don't want to see is tree limbs down low to the ground and brush and other ground fuels intermixing with those tree limbs, because that creates a classic ladder fuel. A ladder as in a thing that will allow a ground fire, a relatively low intensity ground fire, to climb into a tree canopy. Because the quantity of fuel available in the tree canopy, it dwarfs that on the ground. And as trees start to burn, not only do they burn with great intensity, but they have a tendency to put off large flying embers or barons. The bark plate of a pine tree, when carried aloft when it's burning, looks just like an airplane wing from an aerodynamic perspective, and they can fly for miles in advance of the flaming front. So keeping fire out of trees is a great way to reduce fire risk. It's also a very cost-effective way to reduce fire risk because the cost to remove a tree can be significant, but the cost to limb up a tree to create a 6-foot air gap between the lower portions of the canopy and the ground or ground fuels, that's a very modest investment in time and resources, and the sort of thing that can be done in conjunction with an organized MOFD chipping day. Well, we'll come out and we'll chip up those branches after you've removed them. The next thing for fuel mitigation work is roadside clearance. So the fire code requires that the side of the road be cleared 3 feet back and 15 feet up. And the reason this is important is, as everybody knows, and as anyone who has commuted at any time except for the last month who can probably relate to, the surface street network and the capacity of the surface streets in this area are inadequate for moving the entire community at any given time. A fraction of the community is moving during normal rush hours and the roads are overwhelmed. And our roads are already narrow and winding. And when we allow vegetation to encroach onto the shoulder and to grow out over the asphalt and the paved surface, we not only reduce the effective size of the road, which reduces the amount of roadway we can use to execute that simultaneous evacuation and aggregation of a firefighting force, but roads are also fuel breaks. Roads don't burn. On the other hand, if there are heavy growth of vegetation encroaching on the shoulders, we reduce the effectiveness of that road as a fuel break, and we set the stage where there is the potential for direct flame impingement across the road, which will close it for evacuation purposes, as well as speed the fire's growth by allowing it to jump the road with less effort. So we really would like to see work to clear back encroaching vegetation on the roadside, 3 feet of horizontal setback and 15 feet of vertical setback, so that fire spread will be slowed, evacuations will have more roadway to use, and fire engines and other large equipment will be able to rapidly move up those roads. And the next thing is the removal of dead or dying trees. The fire code is very clear that dead or dying trees are required to be removed. The city's tree ordinance allows for the removal of dead or dying trees, as well as over time, they not only drop all the foliage that has become dead or dying that has to be cleaned up, but they have the potential to fall. So it's a very good idea. And then the last thing, which is not necessarily considered fuel mitigation work, because we normally think of fuel mitigation work as cutting things down, but the last one is a general maintenance item. And that's several times per year, particularly as we move into the fall, when we start to be exposed to the Diablo wind events, is getting up on your roof and clearing out the valleys and the gutters to get all the duff and litter, the tree branches and leaves and other things that have accumulated up there over the year, to get all of those out. Because regardless of the fire rating of your roof assembly, if there are 6 inches of eucalyptus litter or other branches and leaves and things on your roof, that roof just became a receptive fuel bed. And an ember landing in that area will start a fire that will absolutely burn your house down. So beyond those specifics, the next thing is just a general admonishment that create defensible space around your home. So what I would recommend is you do a lap of your house looking at the ground, and the ground where your house meets the ground, what is there? If there is tall, uncut, dead grass, if there are various hedges and other brush or junipers or cypress or something of that nature surrounded by dead leaves and grass, that is not only a receptive fuel bed where an ember will start a fire, but there's a ladder fuel that allows that small ground fire to climb up into the brush and other things you have growing next to your house for decorative purposes. And all the fire that's produced by those vegetative items burning is going to be rapidly delivered into your attic as it's captured by the eaves and funneled into the attic where it will start a fire. And if a small fire starts in the attic of your house during one of these events, your house is going to burn to the ground because the firefighters are not going to have the resources to get in, pull ceiling, and put that out. The other thing of great concern, if you have that accumulation of decadent fuels and combustive organic material on the ground right around your house, is the vents that access your crawl space are either 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch mesh in most cases, and the fire will rapidly communicate into the crawl space under your house through that vent. And if a fire gets established in the crawl space, it's almost impossible to put out under these circumstances. And once again, that house will burn to the ground. After you do that first lap, looking at the point where the ground meets the base of the house, the second thing to do would be take another lap, and this time looking up. Look for branches, look for brush, look for trellises and vines, anything that forms a ladder that would deliver fire underneath the eave of your house. So if you have a trellis with an old decadent vine that's dead and has a lot of dry, withered material on it, that trellis and those vines, they just created a ladder, and they created a pathway that will deliver fire underneath the eave, where the eave will capture it and channel it up into the attic and once again burn the house. So really the thing to do is within several feet of the house, you want to be as aggressive as your landscaping aesthetic will let you be to remove as much fuel and break up the continuity. Because a single item, a single privet or brush or other decorative item next to the house that doesn't have anything that will burn underneath it and is trimmed up to create an air gap of 1 foot or 2 feet between the ground and the lower portion of that item, and then is thoughtfully maintained to remove the dead material from the previous year's growth, that does not represent a significant fire risk. And so you can have the vast majority of the landscaping aesthetic and the street view and the other things that we like to have vegetation around our homes for. You can maintain the majority of that while reducing or eliminating the majority of the fire risk. And to me, that seems like a pretty good compromise and something that would be worth your time to consider as you're coming up with a plan for fuels mitigation and gardening to reduce the fire risk. And then the last thing, we just have another reference for how to access our chipping program. We're happy to come on out. We ask that you have 5 neighbors or a larger group who are organized to do it. And on the next slide, we'll talk about the dates that those are currently scheduled in your area. So one of the questions I've heard quite a bit of late is, hey, what can we do during COVID-19? We're on shelter in place, only essential activities are allowed. Not sure if this is essential activity. What do we do? Well, fortunately, there's an easy answer to that. The first one is when it comes to doing the work on your own, fire season is not going to take this year off. And it's as important as ever that you do the work that you would normally do around your home to reduce the risk. The MOFD chipping program is still up and running. They were out chipping today. And working with Candace Anderson's office, our county supervisor, and the county health officer, we were able to get included in the latest version of the shelter in place order, an exception for landscaping for fire safety. For anyone whose landscaper is concerned about being cited for violating the shelter in place order, on our website, and the link is available there, there's a letter from me that identifies that 1, this is an essential activity, and 2, lists what sort of things qualify as fire safety landscaping. To be clear, landscaping for decorative purposes is not permitted. However, landscaping for fire safety is. This letter was published after working with the police chiefs from Moraga and Orinda to ensure that we all viewed the problem the same way and we all understood the intent of the county health officer's letter. So landscaping for fire safety is absolutely declared an essential business, and this is a great time to get that work done. As you or your landscaper are coming up with a plan, always prioritize the defensible space closest to your home and then work outwards. And then for those of you who are in the Downs, we'll have chippers up there on May 4th and 18th and May 20th and 21st in Sleepy Hollow. If the demand exceeds what we can do in those 2 days, we will either get more chippers up there or we will schedule more days. We are happy to partner with communities as they reduce fuels and send the chippers. And we are absolutely committed to meeting the demand at whatever level it ends up being. And then lastly, in doing this work, as I mentioned before, you reduce the chance that your home or your neighborhood is going to be declared uninsurable. Northern Orinda is exempt from insurance cancellations for 1 year from October 27th of 2019. So currently, no one should be getting an insurance cancellation in North Orinda. The zip codes are available on the State Insurance Commissioner's website. But as of October 28th, that prohibition is up. And we saw a significant number of people either being failure to renew or outright cancellations. And there's the potential that that will continue as insurers scramble to understand what the fire risk looks like in California after having absorbed unprecedented losses in 2017 and 2018. Next, if you are doing some landscaping, our folks at Fire Safe Marin have published a very useful website. It's interactive, it's easy to read, and has a bunch of options for plants that are good and plants that are bad. Specific plants that we would encourage removal of, any of the broom families: French broom, Scotch broom, Spanish broom, junipers, rosemary, coyote brush, or baccharis, bamboo, and then in the tree species, Monterey pine and eucalyptus are problematic. So if you're going to be rethinking your landscaping, those are the kind of plants that we would encourage you to prioritize their removal, and then would absolutely encourage you to take a look at Fire Safe Marin or any of the other fire safe resources that make recommendations about plants that are less fire prone. As a general statement, no matter what it is, if it's not properly maintained and it's allowed to become decadent and compact and overgrown, it's a bad idea. And plants near homes of any kind, if not properly maintained, represent a threat either from the plant itself or the decadent materials such as leaves and so forth that can gather underneath them. So if you're rethinking your landscaping, we would encourage you to reduce the density of stuff that's planted in proximity to the home. Next, we're going to talk about notification. So if there's a fire and you have done all your work and you've done everything we can as a community to reduce the prevalence of receptive fuel beds and slow or stop the fire spread, there's still going to be a need to exercise an evacuation, because even under the best of circumstances, getting the residents out of the area, sanitizing it, if you will, simplifies our job of fighting the fire dramatically. And the challenge with evacuation is, how do we let everyone know it's time to go? And the program of record in this area is the community warning system. There is a website there, it's cwsalerts.com. Notification is a very simple process. It's done by text, it's done by email, it's done by direct dial phone calls. If you haven't signed up for the CWS, public safety that is, we don't know your cell phone number. We don't have a master list. So we know with reverse 911 what home lines are associated, or hard lines are associated with addresses. But an awful lot of people either don't have them, or they're cordless phones that won't work during a power shutoff without an uninterrupted power supply. We'd also encourage people to sign up for Nixle alerts. Nixle alerts are how we give information, but evacuation orders are issued via the CWS. So signing up for a Nixle is a good start, but signing up for the community warning system is the gold standard for evacuation notifications. And then lastly is, we know that no matter what method we use, or all methods, which is always our plan, is all of the above, that there are going to be people who don't get the information. And so we'd ask that at the neighborhood level, have a neighborhood notification plan. So if a neighbor is notified, if one pond, if you will, a rock drops in that pond, that ripple will spread throughout the neighborhood. And neighbors notifying neighbors, either by phone or knocking on doors or any other neighborhood system that will effectively get the word out that there's a fire. We appreciate anything that can be done to develop that. That usually is neighborhood specific, and neighbors generally have a better idea of how to notify each other. During the Merrill Circle fire in Moraga last fall, the CWS system was inhibited by the fact that it was a public safety power shutoff, and that is an area with very poor cell phone coverage. A significant number of the evacuees were notified by their neighbors knocking on their door or honking their horns on their way out. So coming up with a plan to notify your neighbors at a neighborhood specific plan. And most importantly, if you have neighbors who need assistance, either they don't drive or they can't get down the stairs by themselves, or they need some sort of help to execute an evacuation, the most effective way to remove them from that area of threat is neighbors helping neighbors. Neighbors are already there, you're pre-positioned, there's probably an empty seat in at least one of the cars that's traveling out of that neighborhood, and identifying who can help a neighbor in need of assistance. Our ability to rapidly bring a whole bunch of ambulances into North Orinda to support evacuation of people who can't drive is very limited, and it's going to take quite a while to organize that sort of an effort. So anything that can be done to organize neighbors to help each other is greatly appreciated and will be very effective. Last two items there are just things to think about if you want an additional layer of notification. Getting a weather alert radio. The CWS has the ability to activate these. They have a battery backup. They will work irregardless of a power shutoff, and they're very effective. They sound a 100 and something decibel alarm inside your home. And then the last thought is, if you have a cordless phone, if the base station does not have power, your cordless phones won't work. So if you rely on cordless phones for the hard line to your house, purchasing a small battery powered UPS to keep both your cordless phone up and running, and then to power the router modem for your internet. Access to the internet provides the opportunity to get real-time updates, to find out what's going on and get more information about the outside world, and maybe particularly relevant as cell systems are overwhelmed as everyone gets on them, or as cell towers are negatively impacted by fire. Here's just a little screenshot of what the sign up looks like, cwsalerts.com. You click on the red thing that says English, it takes you to a Google form. It's about 3 minutes or less to fill out. and then you are into the system and registered. I would encourage, if you live in a home with multiple devices and multiple people, multiple cell phone numbers, multiple emails, sign them all up. The more ways you can be notified, the better. And our ability to reach people is the weak link in the evacuation system, because reaching people at night in their homes is very, very challenging. So as we round this out here, the takeaways from my perspective, really, the biggest thing is do the fuels mitigation work on all parcels around on your parcel. Encourage your neighbors to do it to create defensible space. As we break up the continuity of the fuel bed, and as we remove all the accumulation of combustible vegetation in close proximity to homes, we reduce the community-wide risk. And I think this is a community that understands the threat. This is a environment that's very exposed to wildfire threat. We have significant wildfire history in this area, but this is also a community that understands how serious it is. And this is a community where we have the opportunity to fundamentally change our profile and our exposure to fire risk. And it starts at small properties doing simple work that just about everyone has the ability to do. So every little bit counts. I wouldn't get hung up on the idea that, oh, this is such a big problem, it can't be tackled. I agree that at the community level, this is an elephant, but you eat an elephant one bite at a time. And that bite for you all is the work to be done on your parcel in close proximity to your home, and then working out from your home to thoughtfully reduce the prevalence of fuels and things that will burn on your parcel. And over time, I think it's very possible that this community can fundamentally reduce its fire risk, starting at those small parcels, as we continue to work with the tech piece to have a better understanding of the macro, and continue to work with the large landowners in the surrounding areas and with external agencies for grant funding to increase the number of large-scale projects done in concert with the small-scale projects on each one of your parcels. Obviously, the next thing is, as you're doing that work, organizing through the FireWise program to become FireWise neighborhoods is tremendously helpful from both an organizational and insurance standpoint. And I just encourage everyone to do it. There's no cost. The district is eager to partner with, no cost to apply. There is a modicum of investment as far as fuel mitigation work, and the district's easy to partner with you in that process. And then the last two having to do with evacuation. Sign up for the CWS. It's free, it's quick, it's easy, it's a great idea. Countywide, we're somewhere around 12% of the county is signed up, so not very good. And in the district, we're in the mid 30s, but we could do a lot better, and it would be very helpful if everyone signs up, and then get your friends and neighbors to sign up too. And then lastly, develop a personal and a neighborhood evacuation plan. In the middle of the night when your phone is going off is not the first time you want to think about what it's going to take to evacuate. And if you haven't put the thought into it, you haven't come up with a plan, it's going to take you longer to get out. And you just have a finite amount of time to get on the road before either the roads are going to become congested or the fire is going to start to impinge on them. So put some thought into it ahead of time. If you haven't put some thought into it ahead of time, which certainly is possible, then if you have your loved ones, your car keys, your wallet, and your cell phone, it's time to go. And if you're okay with evacuating with just those 4 things, then you're okay. But putting some thought into ahead of time about how you're going to be prepared to go, and how your neighbors are going to be prepared to go, and how you're all going to help each other to rapidly get out, that's very beneficial. To include, please, only taking 1 car, because the more cars that you take as a family, the greater the impact you will have on the roadway. So with that, we're coming up on an hour of me talking. So I will turn over to Rob and Carol. If there's any questions I can answer, or thoughts that things that'd be better to emphasize for the community's benefit.
Carol, do you want to start?
No, you go ahead, Rob. Thanks.
Actually, why don't you go ahead?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank Chief Winokur. This several times I've heard this talk, but I learned something new every time, and I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to be so thorough. It was awesome. 2 things I would like to say. One is just that Rob and I and several others here in Sleepy Hollow are actively looking for more people to join our Sleepy Hollow FireWise. So, just email either the Sleepy Hollow Neighborhood Association or Rob if you're interested. And the other thing that occurred to me, Chief, when I heard you talking about early warning systems and the fact that you're thinking about using drones, I've heard you say before or warn people, don't think you're helping the fire department by sending out your personal drone. And you might just, I know you'll comment on that better than I will.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great reminder. Yeah, you're absolutely not helping us if you put a drone in the air. There are real airplanes flown by real pilots with thousands of gallons of water potentially underneath them. And pilots have just no sense of humor about drones being in the airspace. So last June, as a matter of fact, we had a small fire start in South Moraga, and we had 4 firefighting aircraft circling to help, all of whom waved off and returned to base because a small private drone was launched by a neighbor who had an interest in getting some cool video footage of us fighting fire. And while we appreciate the thought, and it's always great to see pictures of the firefighters up doing good things, that absolutely turned off 4 aircraft that we could have used. So keeping all of those things on the ground is not only the law, but we appreciate people staying out of the airspace.
Rob, thank you for organizing this. And thank you everyone for the kind of flexibility of moving from Sleepy Hollow School, where it was going to be in person, to doing this virtual meeting. Hopefully that meant that a lot of people could join. And I also appreciate the fact that we can now put it on YouTube so that people who couldn't see it live can watch it later.
Rob, anything to add?
No, I think you did a great job covering all the major topics, and I think we can go ahead and wrap it up.
Well, let me leave everyone with this video, if we may. We started off with this, so I think it's relevant to end with it. So this is a video filmed by the IBHS and shows the impact of blown embers against a house. And so what they did here is they created this ember producing machine, and they have a house, and it's surrounded by mulch, combustible siding, and some small brush. You can see how the house is holding up to the fire pretty well. But the vegetation around it, specifically the mulch and those low shrubs, those start to support fire. And that fire then begins to attack the house. And eventually it will find a gap. And when it finds a gap, it gets into the wall. It finds that lee, that little eddy on the left side where the wind's holding it. And it then starts to make its way up into the eaves where it's channeled up into the attic. And that's how a house burns down. So in the absence of those, that fuel bed of those combustible material right next to the house, the embers are largely just going to bounce off. And so it's really important to just encourage everyone to take that hard look of what's right next to your house, do that maintenance, clear out those items. It will absolutely reduce the risk that you, your family, and your neighbors are exposed to. And it's just not something that anyone else can do. It's really something we need homeowners out doing that work around their home. So we really appreciate the help of the organizers getting everyone together, and to of our 50 attendees for coming on a Wednesday night, which is fantastic. And really appreciate the work you all are going to do, and then the help you're going to provide us in spreading the word to your friends and neighbors.
Thank you, Chief.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Well, anybody watching, looking at the chat? Only 50? Where's everyone else? They must be watching on YouTube.
Great.
Okay, Chief.
All
Excellent
right.
job.
Take care. Have a good night.
All right, you too.